reasons that I was interested in applying to Morley Stanwood. Number one, this size of community and the location as it being a rural school district is very appealing to me personally. And in my career, I have chose to work in smaller rural districts. So that was something that was appealing to me. I also wanted to start moving and working in an area that was a little bigger than my current district, and to take my experience and help other districts that see some needs that they're going to have to address in terms of curricular needs. And I've had that chance to look at your data and can see that the skills that I have would be a wonderful match in terms of being able to help support student achievement and growth. And then I'm also looking for another opportunity in my career just to give me experiences, and I'm looking for a place where it brings me closer to West Michigan, if you will. And my family, of course, lives mostly in the Greenbelt area, my brother, sister, Trufen. And so I want to get back over there. You're smiling. I knew some Bormas once upon a time. Don't know if you're related to that. Through 4-H, of course. But anyway, and so this is an opportunity for me, and I'm looking to take the skills and things I've learned in the last 3 years and bring those into a new district that could use that opportunity to work with me, and I would have a joy time working with them.
Great, thank you.
It's my turn. I can see certain things already, so here's a question. What have you learned about our district, number one? And do you have some suggestions for creating a specific direction for our district based on what you know?
Yes. I have learned a bit about your district. I actually have friends that have been associated with Morley Stanwood, and a number of years ago I coached the high school equestrian team in Greenbelt. And of course Morley Stanwood has quite a nice equestrian team, and they were very competitive. So I got to know a number of folks, be it parents and students, and also the coaches that were associated with Morley Stanwood at that time. Likewise, a former teacher, educator from here at that time, her name was Angie Rasmussen, is a very good friend of our family, and I know Angie quite well, her and her sister, and her mom, and we all my kids grew up together with them through 4-H processes, and we stay in very close contact. And she has nothing but the highest regards for this district and loves it dearly, and has shared a lot about the teaching staff and how dedicated they are. So, and what do I know about this community? I know a lot. I would say some about the people, but more importantly, taking a look at what is the curriculum and your financial situation. I've had a chance to really take a look and learn more things about those particular areas, and I would love the chance to speak more in detail about what I would see in terms of bringing the district and helping it reach its goals of excellence in those areas.
And that's definitely coming down the way.
Thank you. You might have another question or two on that.
All right.
I'm next.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, what is your opinion of the superintendent board communication, and how do you plan on implementing that when that's all?
Well, I will say that I have found it is extremely important to have great relationships between the superintendent and the board, and to be open and be able to communicate. And in my role as a superintendent, to help be the one to help educate and make it so that it's put from, instead of educationalese, into layman's terms. Sometimes they get caught up in all the new phases and all of the new terminologies that are out there, to help it better be spread and understood in the community. And it's particularly with the board, because as the board members, you're the ones that are answering questions out to the community. So it's my job to help keep that communication. I feel communication is extremely important between the two, and maintaining that relationship, understanding that perhaps we're not always going to all agree all the time on the same things, but how do we professionally talk about weighing in that differences of what our decisions and roles within the scope of the board and superintendent relationship. So I think it's important that we both have communication, that I understand as a superintendent what it is that you want me to do is in terms of your employee for the district, and vice versa, as your employee, that I communicate and give you back the information to make it relevant to you, so you have an understanding of what's going on in the district. So I think it's a symbiotic, but yet should be a very close and great working relationship.
what is your history of curricular and instructional improvement, and how would you lead our district forward in these areas? Write down your line.
That is right down my line. Well, I have quite a history of curriculum and instructional work behind me. Most recently, I'll speak to the district that I'm currently in. We do not have a separate curriculum director, so I also act in the role as a curriculum director for our district. I have 2 master's degrees. One's in educational leadership and the other one is in secondary adult ed, with curriculum as the focus of what that is. I have worked in a variety of capacities within a curricular area, and then within my district as a superintendent, I also have been heavily involved and engaged in working specifically with our high school principal, who took on that role. I hired him when I first came into that district. Just at that time, they had previously released the previous principal from the high school. There had been a lot of concerns about the academic success of the high school and where it was at that point in time. I hired the new principal, transferred him in from one of the other buildings, and we started right on task with taking a look at what is it that we're doing in terms of student success. So I can look at the information from a data analysis piece, can take a hold of what needs to be done to kind of turn things around. And in my current district, that involved putting in place pretty darn quickly a couple of programs to make that leap into moving it in the right direction. It takes a look at data, and for this district, I've had the chance to look at some of your data, and using that data to help drive where that instruction piece needs to go. So from a curriculum instructional leader standpoint, I have a great deal of knowledge. I've used that knowledge, and I can say that in the district I'm currently in, it has shown steady progress in the last 3 years in all of the curricular areas that we have, targeted and are working hard on for the high school. The high school has shown significant growth. We have increased our graduation rate the last 3 years and lowered our dropout rate. We are ranked right up there in the top of our RESD, which is 9 school districts. We're ranked second in that place now, which is not where we used to be. We score extremely well in our areas that needed to improve in, and doing a comparison analysis. I know that math is an area that should be a concern in looking at that, and that's an area that we've addressed some significant changes. Prior to coming into St. Louis, my previous curricular experiences, and again working as a principal in 2 different districts. In both districts, the work that was put together and shared with the teams that I like to work with, one of the things I like to do curricular-wise or instructional-wise is to build that leadership capacity so that all of those people that are working on that project truly understand the vision, direction of where we're going. And so from that standpoint, the team that we put together, both of the schools, the first one that I was in Colorado was Gilpin County Schools, received recognition from the state for significant improvement. That school is ready to be on a watch, well, it was on a watch list. But we had significant improvements that occurred within the 2 years that I was there. Then I moved to Woodland Park, Colorado, with a little bigger school system there. And that high school also received recognition, and as it was stated, is looked as in several states as one of the lighthouses, if you will, of showing high schools how to get there and to make significant improvements. So I do have significant experience. I'm educated in that form, if you will, continue to stay current, and it's really a passion for me. I love to see great things happen for kids.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, how would you use the current potential district financial resources to deal with the financial crisis here in Michigan?
I think we're going to buy money tree packets or something, because I'm telling you, the state is not being real friendly with giving out much of it. But the crisis that we are facing here in Michigan is real, and it does impact every single district. And in terms of using our financial availability, what we have available as a district, and how are we going to keep that in terms of continuing to educate students, that is a big crisis, and it is a big challenge today. Looking at the resources that we do have available, I think one area I'm looking at, particularly speaking of Morley Stanwood, you do have title schools, and you have social and economic disadvantaged students. And so there's monies to be able to be garnered and to put into places that would benefit the education of those students and being able to tap into those more fully and more directed, I think, with where the curricular design and implementation needs to be. And if I can give you an example of using title monies to do such a thing, we've recently just made an amendment to our title monies and are able to bring in some additional technology, putting in a full summer school for elementary because we saw some needs in there. And so it's using the dollars that we have available, maybe tweaking them in a new way, being able to apply them and knowing where we can utilize those monies for certain avenues to access it, to be able to create additional programming that we didn't have before. So we're not spending new dollars, we're reallocating and making it work better for us with what we have and what we need. I think in terms of, if I'll ask you to reread your question one more time, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. How would you use the current and potential district financial resources to deal with the obvious financial crisis that Michigan is?
Right. I think another, and for resources, that's title monies resources. I think for other resources, there's two ways to look at your budget, and so often we just kind of think cuts that we have to make to get that bottom line to balance. Well, the other side of that is sometimes how do you generate some revenues to help offset that so that you're not necessarily making such deep cuts. And I would want to take a look and see in more detail what it is Morley Stanwood is doing in terms of generating income for the district, and is there possibilities or cost savings? So it's not necessarily cuts, but using the resources that you currently have. How do you maybe collaborate and use those resources more effectively or share those with another district? As an example, transportation, we, in my district, currently transport for 2 other school districts, students that come from the corridor right there at the St. Louis Alma corridor, transport them up to Mount Pleasant. Prior to us doing the collaborative efforts, each of us were sending a bus up there and costing each of us the same dollars amount to do that, to carry our students up to do the vocational programming. When we got together and said, let's collaborate, all of a sudden the cost went down a third for each of us. So we shared that cost. So sometimes it's trying to find ways to be more effective in how you're using the money that you have, be creative and seeing if there's ways out there to generate some monies, be it through grant programs, be it through opportunities of collaborations with the local communities and resources available, or sometimes just restructuring with what you have. And I guess the very bottom line is sometimes it takes some real hard negotiations and to make those kind of things happen so that you can save monies within the current budget. And been there, done that as well.
Thank you.
I'm up next.
Okay.
Okay. What do you think is your greatest administrative personal strength, and how would it help Morley Stanwood School System? How could it help Morley Stanwood School System?
I think for me, one of my greatest strengths is my enthusiasm and my passion for education. I've always told my students when I was a teacher, I tell my colleagues as, you know, administrator is you should always find a job that you love and you will never work a day in your life. And that's kind of scary to say, I suppose, when you're interviewing for a job, but the other piece of that is that I absolutely love what I do, and I'm passionate about education, I'm passionate about kids. And I think that I can bring that passion to Morley Stanwood. And part of that kind of overflows into what I enjoy doing is building collaborative leadership teams and creating more depth within the leadership structures so that it's not just one person that's having to carry the weight of making changes. It becomes everyone involved in that process. So from teacher leaders to building leaders to district level leaders, everybody becomes on the same page, if you will, can build that its common vision and be able to carry that forward. So my enthusiasm, my ability to create leadership teams and to extend that leadership out into the buildings so people are invested in what we're doing, I think is something that I can bring that's unique to me, to Morley Stanwood, and help all administrators be able to see the big picture and where we're going and do that all together so that everybody's working on a common mission, a common goal.
Thank you.
On Monday morning, you come into work and you have 3 complaints, one from a
staff member, one from a parent, and one from a board member. How do you prioritize and who do you respond to first?
Well, sometimes I like to find out from the board member what the complaint is, because oftentimes that may be associated with what the parent complaint is, and the parent may have, the board member may have directed that parent to then contact the superintendent for that. So it's nice to give a little heads up in advance if that's possible, if there's no message with that other than call this number now, so I can see if there's a relationship there. I think in terms of prioritizing, my door is an open door, and for staff and the communications, I receive a lot of emails, and so I would probably have a heads up if there was something, you know, significant or serious that happened over the weekend because of that communication. I get it through the principals or through the staff. They give me a call if it's something happening, so I might not see that as an emergency situation. The board member and the parent would be probably touching base first, just because I've got other communication venues in place to maybe have some heads up on what a staff member may need, and it may not be an emergency. All emergencies I usually get pretty quickly. And in looking at the priorities of what that is, I take seriously what all the concerns of our parents. I really do. I want to listen to what they are, and then I want to measure that against what are the policies and the guidelines that we have to live with in the district. And to be fair and firm and consistent in that, no matter who that is, you know, in the district. So regardless of what that, you know, message for that parent is, whether it's a request for something or something, you know, their child didn't get picked up by the bus that morning and it ended up on my doorstep, you know, I want to hear that, and we want to talk about how can we best relate that. In terms of the communication with the board, again, if there wasn't any other information, I want to find out, did you get a call, something going on? Give me a heads up, and I'll let you know after this is resolved what's going on. But I like to very much stay in touch with, you know, the board and different, you know, members of the board as they contact me. And I would always encourage if you could give me a little heads up of what it's about, you know, hey, I heard this, or if that would give me information to be prepared to be able to call back. So I think all of those are priorities to me. Some of them would be prioritized based on what information was available with that message, but I would want to touch base with parent, board member, and then staff member. I think in terms of, or board member, parent, in terms of trying to touch base with people.
Back here again. What is one of your strategies you have in working with our district to make AYP?
Well, one of the first things that we're going to need to take a look at in terms of looking at AYP and information would be taking a look at why is it that the district isn't making AYP. When I looked at the data, I did see that you haven't made, at the high school level, the AYP in the last 4 years. You're on level 4, which now requires that there be some kind of implementation plan put together about what is it you're going to do about that. And I think that when you look at, you know, your language arts and your math, those two being very significant areas that aren't cutting the mustard, so to say, you got to get on top of those first. We got to get in there and take a look at what those are telling us. Although I didn't bring all the data and information with me for tonight's interview, I can tell you that I do know that you haven't seen growth in those areas where it needs to be. I also know that you should have a concern because next year those areas, the testing requirements are going to ratchet up yet again. So when you're already falling below the mark significantly and you have to ratchet it up even further, you don't have time to waste, and it means to jump on it and get on top of that. So coming in, I think, to look at how you're going to address your AYP is first, you know, you got to talk about that elephant that's in the room and say, here's what I see, talk to me about what's going on, and then, you know, here's a plan of action to get there. I took a look at middle school scores as well, because as much as we don't necessarily want to, you know, think of it as being a continuum of concerns, we need to make sure that that transitioning coming in from middle school to high school, by the time you test them as 11th grades, that we've got some good data that's helping us in that. So I'd look at the data, I'd look and see what your freshman rates are. I would look to see what other kinds of assessments that you have going along the way, and that's stuff that you're going to have internally that I'm not going to get off on the internet right now. But those are things that you need to look at. You have to really get down and dig and articulate, where is it that we have a problem? What's the problem? And then what are some really research-based strategies that we're going to do to make that, be successful? I will say that your social studies has scored significantly higher than the rest of the areas, but when you look at what AYP is, they're gonna be looking at those, your language arts areas and your math areas, and those are significantly lower than where you have to be. When you add that on next year again, it's gonna take some turning around, and it's gonna have to happen quickly, and it's gonna be done through using data. It's gonna be done with working with staff and input. You need to know what you're currently doing in order to be able to know what's not working and be able to address and change it.
Thank you.
How can a superintendent make themselves more effective with community involvement? And do you have an example of community involvement?
Yes, lots of them. In my current district, one of the things that, when I was hired there, that I was told, and it has come to be the case, I guess, and you've read information, is that St. Louis Schools wasn't really seen as being actively engaged in its community. It wasn't seen as being out there and having someone advocate and kind of share with the community some of the wonderful things that are going on. And I will say that I enjoy that part of my job a great deal, being out and about in the community and actively advocating for, the district. I currently belong to Rotary Optimist. I'm on the board of the chamber. I belong to a business community school liaison group. And in every chance that, I can possibly get as a superintendent, I'm out there sharing what's wonderful and positive about the district. Because if we're not tooting our horn, nobody else is gonna be out there, doing it for us. And so it's those opportunities, to take those opportunities. And it really does help people better understand that sometimes don't have any connection to the school. They don't have children in the school system any longer, or they moved into the area and haven't been engaged. They're here because they like the area. The school is significantly important to the surrounding community. And for us to be out there, and the superintendent to be out there sharing what's going on, why they should be proud, why they should support, and what great things are happening, I take that personally as a role that as superintendent I need to do, and to be out there. So I love being engaged, I love attending all the things, I go to the fairs, I go to the meetings, I attend legislative things. There's nobody over there that's not gonna have heard of, anything that I'm involved in and not have heard something positive going on about the school. So.
Okay, obviously you covered grants a little bit already in our conversation, but I'm still gonna ask you, do you have experience working with grants? How can a district our size maximize our grant potential? Maybe it's a little more detail on what you.
Okay, more detail. I do have some experience in writing grants, and experience in oversight and management of grants. And how would that benefit, taking a look at Morley Stanwood? I think it's an area to be discovered. What else might be out there that could benefit this district? I do notice that you have currently, some high-risk students. You have an alternative school that's listed. You have a low socioeconomic student base that are not performing up to where they are. And there's monies out there available for rural schools and communities, depending upon the demographics and depending upon what the specific scenarios are to take a look at for funding. I've already mentioned the title. I have written grants, used to be drug and safe-free schools, to be able to get some monies for at-risk programming. Also, taking a look at your local areas and see how they support. I've written for Sam's, from Walmart's. I get online and I look for technology, and have a couple of technology grants out there. And every little bit that you can add to the coffers that doesn't come out of the general fund then is kind of a plus. And so there's grants to be had out there. Oftentimes it's the marriage of those grants and getting them to be able to work specifically with the district given your needs. Another area to look at is in collaboration with the local ISD and taking a look at what big grants are out there, because oftentimes there can be a collaboration effort of multiple schools, multiple schools that can go together. And we have done that in Data Director, Data for Student Success. We're recently, and just have approved that the entire RESD that I'm currently employed in, all of the districts are going to do cost savings in doing a process where all of us are switching over to one particular kind of data software system. So instead of having 9 school districts and multiple different venues of data software systems, we're able to pull together and get one system. The cost savings there is going to be, instead of as a district, and it's not necessarily grant, but it's kind of in that because it took a consortium to do this. Instead of us having to pay for a meal lunch program, a student data program that's going to give just our student accounting information, a separate program that also does our grade books and such programs. Now we've tied in and we're married into one system that we're going to be coming into, and everybody's going to have that. So all those little pieces that were individually being paid for are now, it's going to be less to pay for one than it was to pay for each of those a la carte menus, if you will. So that's another way to take a look at, what collaboratively can be done with other districts, and whether it's a grant process, sometimes you write it up as a contractual process, but how do you get things together? So I think looking at what grants are currently available, there are some monies available for at-risk, there's some monies available through title that you get restructuring with it. I think those are some specifics about how to do that or what to go about. Individually, if there's a need right here for one specific thing, you can always go in and research to find out what that grant possibility might be. Literacy is a big area. There's monies available for literacy and seeing what reading scores and such are. That might be an area to take a look at specifically too.
Easy question here. What are your long-term and short-term personal and professional goals?
Easy pen.
Easy.
Well, short-term is I would like to be selected as your next superintendent. Did we make that short enough?
Good.
I think long-term goals for me is I am going to be a perpetual learner until they, close the lid. So I continue to add on to my career, continue to learn. I think long-term goals, I want to be in a community that we can continue to grow together for a period of time. I'm looking at, 10 years down the road still, wanting to retire, but I want to be in a district where I can be there for 10 years and build and grow that district. I want to be there to be able to take it to the level that the community wants to see it, to grow, to be a district of excellence. That's always been a challenge, and that's a personal goal for me. I want to help a district become a district of excellence. And how do you define that? What does that look like? And that would be working with the board to establish that. I know in my mind what that looks like, but it becomes a vision of everyone. Sometimes it's my vision shared becomes a shared vision, but that's kind of a process I think is a long-term goal for me. And short-term, certainly I'm excited to be here and would like great things to happen.
All right, thank you. You've answered a couple of these questions, but just run this. Do you have any experience in collaborative efforts with other local districts or ISDs? Maybe
Yes.
something you didn't mention.
Yes. In addition to using the collaboration of transportation between the, it'd be Breckenridge, Alma, and St. Louis, and we do the transporting. That's a collaborative effort we've done between other districts. We also, and it began this last year from the entire RESD, and this was a 2-year project, we also collaboratively did transportation for all of the districts for special education student population, and that also became a cost savings. And what happens is that we have a variety of students that have to be transported to other locales within the region, and each district was having to individually transport those students to those various locations. St. Louis happens to be the area that we take on all of those that are hearing impaired. So they come to us from Beale City, from Shepherd, from Fulton, any students that are hearing impaired, they all get transported into our district. So before it was each district was having to kind of pick it up. Well, with this collaborative effort, we now have Dean Transportation. So that's another collaborative effort, and they just do our special education services. And so that was a cost savings when all of us, because now instead of one district having to send a bus for just maybe a couple of students, now Dean's Transportation has a route that can go around and pick them up for various districts, and that's a cost savings with fewer runs. And so that's another collaborative effort. I think other collaborative efforts, maybe not just with the RISD, but we've got collaborative efforts going on with our local city. We share services, crossing guard. We trained one of our staff members to do the crossing guard in town, and where the police department previously had to pay for and hire and train for the crossing guard. We now do that. In exchange for that, what happened was they decided to pick up our weekend building patrols. So where we were having custodial having to pay for overtime to send them in to do building checks on the weekend, now because the police force is out and they're like, well, we just drive around anyway, now they stop and do the building checks and check for if there's things that are concerned. And so that's a no cost, if you will, or a reduced cost significantly for both of us. It became a win-win situation. So our buildings are being monitored and we're making sure our children are safe crossing the street. So there's a lot of ways to do collaborative and creative ways to job share, cost share, variety of things there.
Just to follow up on
Yeah.
that question, you would just have Dean Transportation on the special education?
Yes, yes. We currently, as our district itself, Dean Transportation is currently being housed in St. Louis for this effort because we're centrally located for all of the areas. So they're housed there and we are renting part of a facility to them to do the dispatch and such. So our district reaps additional benefit from that because of another contract from that. It's not always been favorable by everybody, but it's a win for our district. In terms of Dean's Transportation, I've also worked with their business affiliates, Kelly and Brian. We also have a contract with Dean's that they do our maintenance and our dispatching for our own district.